A few years ago, I interviewed David Finkel about an extraordinary book he wrote called The Good Soldiers. He's now back with me to discuss its sequel, Thank You for Your Service. And it tells the story of what happens to so many, far too many, young soldiers coming back from Iraq in particular to face an uncertain future in America, carrying with them great and often invisible mental wounds. David, welcome back.
Thanks. It's nice to be back. Glad we're both still in business.
David, for people who haven't read the first book, a bit of a backtrack. The Good Soldiers told how you linked up with a battalion in Baghdad, very young soldiers. You spent months with them.
In 2007, if you recall, it's history now. The war, at least in the American version of it, seemed to have reached its potentially tragic moment. 30,000 troops, American troops, were inserted into Iraq, including 800 guys in this one battalion I embedded with to write their story. That first book, it was a hard book to do. These guys had a rough deployment. And when I finished that, wrote that, I thought I was done. And it wasn't until afterward, and after we talked, actually, that guys started getting in touch with me and telling me how unexpectedly poorly they were coping in terms of sleeplessness. Some went so far to use the word depression. A lot of guys drinking a lot, getting angry unexpectedly, and it went on from there. And so I figured if I'm so hot, I better finish the story.
We're going to spend a fair bit of time now talking about Adam Schumann.
Okay.
How did you get his trust?
I met Adam Schumann one day when I was asking around during a quiet period, who's a great soldier? Who do I need to meet? Somebody mentioned this guy Schumann. A couple more weeks went by before I finally made my way to where he was. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. I go into a room to see this great soldier. Oh, man, he was just so gaunt and haunted looking, and it turned out that it had all added up finally and spilled over, and he had to go home for psychological reasons. So there's a part in the first book where he leaves the war, and I accompany him to the helicopter out, and this guy is just so cloaked in guilt and shame for having to leave the war.
One day he doesn't go on a patrol.
Well, that was
and
one
his
of the
buddy
things.
is killed in a bomb.
Yeah, he didn't go on patrol one day, and somebody who did go was killed, and somebody came back and said to Schumann, this wouldn't have happened if you were there. And he meant it as a compliment, because Schumann is a guy who, he was sharp. He found the bombs. He couldn't go that day. So this guy said it to him as kind of a compliment, but it was one more reason to feel ashamed in his own mind.
And he carries that burden back to the United States
He did, and he does. And his wife Saskia, who has her own after-war, and this kind of cluster of people in Kansas who have been affected by somebody else's policy.
There's a less familiar acronym, TBI.
Yep, traumatic brain injury.
injury.
You can't do a lot of things. Sequencing is difficult. Memory is affected. There have always been concussions, but it so happens in these wars, the gear these guys are wearing is good enough that what would have killed you in a previous war now just rattles you. And so that swells the numbers, all the traumatic brain injuries.
Okay, let's go back to the Adam Schumann story. You've mentioned his wife Saskia, because the mental wounds you describe don't just affect the soldiers. And one of the strengths of what you've done here is that you talk about the families, the wives who don't recognize their husbands anymore, the kids who are afraid of their dads.
You're describing accurately. That does happen. In the case of Saskia, her husband came home. Think of a homecoming from war. It's supposed to be a hopeful moment. And she was hopeful right up until she saw him get off the plane and start walking toward her. And she saw the same thing I saw, this kind of stooped, haunted-looking man. And right then, Saskia's transition began from hopefulness to, her own version of guilt and just flat out fury over not only what had happened to him, but what had happened to them, what had happened to her.
Who does she blame?
She blamed herself. She blamed him. She blamed the big people. She blamed the president. She blamed whoever could be blamed.
I'm surprised that you allowed to embed in the family as you had in the army.
Yeah, but you know this from your own work. Don't you think people appreciate when someone genuinely pays attention to them? They knew something was amiss. I think they were grateful that someone was paying attention and making a serious effort to convey their story.
We've done any number of programs on the very shabby treatment that American soldiers have had going back with ordinary issues, with ordinary problems. But it seems, according to what you're telling us, much worse with mental problems.
It's pretty ad hoc. I think anybody within that system of trying to fix these soldiers would acknowledge that there are many more people to try to fix than they were expecting. And then there's another thing that adds to the problem, which has to do with geographical disparities. If you're a professional, if you're a therapist, and you have your choice of where to live, you're good chance you're going to live in the East Coast of the United States or the West Coast, not so much in the middle. But it just so happens that the greater proportion of soldiers come from places where there aren't an abundance of therapists to help them out.
Many of the wives, the women in the book, talk about how they need help too, and you see that, don't you?
Yeah, sure. But for any of these folks to step forward and say that they need help, this is not easily done. I'm not sure how easy it might be in Australia, but I can tell you in the U.S., especially in this population, these are rough and tough soldiers. These are infantry guys. And to step forward and say, I need help, that's perceived to be a career breaker. It's something that's going to haunt them forever. And in their own minds, it's acknowledging not a need for help, it's acknowledging weakness.
David, in this country, there's an organisation, has been forever, called the RSL, the Returned Servicemen's League. There have to be similar outfits in America, presumably very large and powerful ones. Are they fighting the good fight for their reluctant membership?
There's something like 60,000 NGOs in America that say they are trying in some way
to help. Run that figure past me again.
60,000. Now, a lot of those clearly are bogus. It's just a fundraising opportunity. There's some legitimate ones, and there's some that do great work, and I admire them so much. But here's the story. Here's what can happen with good intentions. There's a very nice program in western Kansas, a small little thing I think it's called Hunt for Heroes or something like that. The idea is to take a mentally wounded soldier and his family and just give them a few days break from what they're going through. And Adam Schumann and his wife Saskia are chosen for this. Well, as always happens with them, they're driving out to western Kansas, they get in a fight, Adam does a U-turn, turns around, drops Saskia off. He doesn't know what to do. He has just been in his basement with a gun against his chin, so close to killing himself. Did not do it that day. Now he's going out to Kansas. He and Saskia fight. He drops her off. He keeps going to this thing that has such good intentions, and it's something like 20 wounded soldiers are taken into a hotel conference room and welcomed with a gift. And Adam opens his gift. It's a long box. Inside is a shotgun. Now this man has a shotgun again. Good intentions, but things all through the book get so screwed up when you go from the journey of good intentions down to what happens on the ground.
Tell us about Amanda Doster.
Well, Amanda Doster is a complicated character. The death of her husband is another of the things that affects Adam Schumann so deeply. It's several years after her husband has died, and she can't get over it. And her friends are losing patience with her. Enough is enough, which is making her feel lousy. But she can't get over it. And there's a scene in the book where she's driving around her little Kansas town one day, and she gets to a stoplight, and she looks over at the car next to her. It's a little truck, and it's a business truck for a pest extermination company. And she looks at the driver, and oh my God, it's her husband. And she gets it. He's alive. He didn't die in the war. He just didn't like the war. And he left, and he came home, and he's hiding out, and he's working this pest control job, and he's saving money. And soon he's going to come home and ring the very bell that they rang when they told her he was dead. And then the light changes, and she shakes her head, and he's still dead. And it's another day where she just can't get over it.
Look, in the book, you do say that the only treatment most vets get is medication, pills for this, pills for that.
Well, that's an overwhelmed system, and that's exactly right. So there are some guys who are just so over-medicated. There are many things that make me angry about all this, and one is to see these guys who are just zombie-like because they're just on so many meds.
America's had a lot of wars, it's had a lot of rehearsals, it's had a lot of time to plan for this, but it didn't.
I think the people who are in charge of things would agree with you. They didn't.
I watched a couple of Jon Stewart programs where he took up cudgels generally on the issues, and was incredibly impassioned about it. So it seems to me that there are media responses, there are people who are terribly distressed by what is in effect a broken promise to the soldiers.
Let's take the title of the book, Thank You for Your Service. In the U.S., that has become the go-to phrase. It's ubiquitous. So if somebody will walk up to a soldier, see someone in a uniform, and say, thank you for your service, it's well-intentioned, but it's not asking a question. It's almost too easy a thing to say. So when we were kind of casting around for a title, the reason we like that is you read the book and you'll know, oh, this is who we're thanking and this is what we're thanking them for.
RN